Shalom, my friends, wonderful to be with you. Today we are going to speak about Jacob and Joseph. Do you remember the story? Jacob lost his son Joseph. His brothers are going back to Egypt and suddenly they discover him. He was the ruler of Egypt. Now they have to go back home and tell to their aged father, you know what? Your son is alive again. And how is the reaction of Jacob? You can see in Genesis 45. He can't take it. He just can't take it. He's like, no, it can't be. He was dead. He was dead for so many years. I've been grieving him. How can he be alive now? And today we're going to speak about something a bit similar. Treasures who've been lost for so long that we can't believe. The Jewish people and the world is like, no, really? You find something in Israel about the treasure? Not just of the temple, but also of the tabernacle of Moses. Now we have, Shalom.
Shalom.
We have Jim Barfield. He comes all the way from America. Thank you very much, Jim, to
My
coming.
pleasure. It's my pleasure.
Thank you. Jim is from America, from Oklahoma. He worked in the army for 10 years. Then he's been again in the civilian life and being a firefighter. And you've been in this terrible bombing in Oklahoma and you work as an investigator. I'm sure that, again, is like not very, it wasn't pleasant. But now you've been an investigator in America and now you've been an investigator in Israel. Can you tell us a bit your story?
And where do you want me to start?
I think you were speaking about the Bible a bit to me before, and I think it's a good start.
Yeah, my investigative skills didn't come from my training as an arson investigator. Mm-hmm. Certainly helped, especially with report writing and that sort of thing. It really, really helped. But my investigative skills came from my Bible study. Because I still to this day, I love Bible study. And I don't want to hear, I can remember when I was a child, I didn't want to hear what the preachers were telling me. I want to read it for myself. Don't tell me what to believe. I want to see it. I want to read it for myself. And that's what I did. And that's how I got so deeply into, because the Bible led me to the Dead Sea Scrolls. The Dead Sea Scrolls led me to the Copper Scroll. And the first time I read the Copper Scroll, it was not interesting. It was boring. It was about gold and silver and gems. But I met a man named Vendell Jones. Mm-hmm. Vendell Jones, he thought he was Indiana Jones, and maybe he was, I don't know. But he told me about it. The films are
kind of made from him, isn't it?
Well, that's what they say. Yeah. That's what he believes too.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know. It's interesting. He was a very interesting man, and I really liked him. Mm-hmm. But he was telling me.
Is he still alive?
No, he died several years ago. Okay. I went to his funeral, actually. But he told me, he said, Jim, he said, let me tell you. He said, you like the Dead Sea Scrolls? I said, yeah, I love them. He said, what do you think about the Copper Scroll? And I said, I think it's boring. And he laughed. He said, that Copper Scroll has got more biblical information than all the other Dead Sea Scrolls together. And I didn't believe him, but after I got into it, and after I began to study the Copper Scroll, because I wanted to know, because I was an investigator. I won Oklahoma Investigator of the Year, International Investigator of the Year. So I did well. So I thought, let me try it. Let me see if I can maybe figure out the Copper Scroll. And I'm not kidding. You believe me, don't believe me, it doesn't matter. I was sitting at my desk at my home at 5 o'clock in the morning, had my coffee, and I had my Dead Sea Scroll translation in front of me. And I started reading the Copper Scroll to see if I could understand it. And because it'd been 52 years and no one had figured out how to understand it.
Yeah, that's it, because I know that some people tried to look at what it means and they couldn't understand really what it was about.
I looked at it from a different perspective. I'm not a scholar, I'm not a archaeologist. That's not what I do, but I am an investigator. So I took those techniques that I used that worked so well in the fire department, and I applied them to this scroll. And within just a few minutes, I figured out how to understand it. It
so
says,
how?
Well, it's very simple. I mean, I did something that men normally don't do. Mm-hmm. I followed the instructions. I started reading, it said, under the ruins in the Valley of Achor. Well, I knew where the Valley of Achor is. It's where the Dead Sea's at. it said under the ruins. I said, okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick a set of ruins, and I'm going to use those ruins, and if the Copper Scroll descriptions match that set of ruins, I'll stick with it. Because nowhere in the Copper Scroll does it say to change ruins and go to some other ruins. It just says under a set of ruins. So that's what I applied. I read the first line. It said, at the steps heading east 40 cubits, find 17 talents of silver vessels. So I looked at the map of Qumran, which I had one right there on my desk. I'd had it for years laying around.
Is it the one that you have here?
Yeah, actually.
Could you open it?
Yeah, you want to do it now?
Yeah, sure,
okay.
Sure.
It's big.
It's
You're going to
okay.
have to help me.
Sure.
This is what I used. And it said at the steps heading east 40 cubits. Well, that is east. That's toward the Dead Sea. Well, there was only one set of steps on this that I recognized, and it was this steps.
Is it like a mikveh? Is it a mikveh?
Yeah, or a utility pool, one of the two. But I measured it. There was a scale that came with it, and I measured it, and it was 40 cubits long. And I thought, oh my goodness, probably a coincidence. Then it said, at the north end of the community, there is a mikveh, a ritual bath, that has 2 entries. And it said, you have to go down and to the left to go into it. Do you see a mikveh on here?
Over there.
With 2 entries.
Wow.
When you enter, you go down and to the left. And the description of this one was so descriptive that Shuka Dorfman, the head of the Antiquities Authority of Israel, he just went, and the director, one of the directors for the Antiquities Authority for the West Bank, did the same thing. Over and over, that one particular pool is where they just fell in love.
They knew, yeah.
So that's how it all started, because those are the same ones that I actually, when I began with.
Yeah, so sure. So this is like a replica?
I made this.
Wow.
I made this. I went to a craft store. Let me make sure it's right side up. I went to a craft store, and I got some copper, and I did it exactly the way they did back in the day. Now, this is thinner than what they use. The copper they used was probably twice as thick.
So do you think they had to have that because they knew that it was almost indestructible compared to scrolls?
Compared to the animal skins is what they were using. They were kosher, very clean, but they were animal skins. Well, the copper was used because they knew it had to last 2,000 years.
Unbelievable, ridiculous, and impossible are but a few terms that have been thrown at Jim Barfield in the last 8 years before he would present his research for the first time. But after 5 minutes into the full Copper Scroll Project disclosure, even the most rigid skeptic sat up and listened. The staff of the Copper Scroll Project realizes that empty claims can be made by anyone. Claims can indicate that you can lose 5 pounds overnight, get rich quick, or say an important biblical discovery may be imminent. With that in mind, we will be disclosing a very small portion of Jim Barfield's research, releasing just enough to show the possibility that an important discovery may truly be on the horizon.
So when was it written? Because when I was reading a bit of it, it's like you are speaking about Jeremiah.
Yes.
This is my favorite prophet.
Yeah. Now the scholar, it's my favorite prophet.
Okay.
There's probably at least 4 documents. Tell the story about the Copper Scroll. They tell a story about Jeremiah and his men burying the treasures of the Copper Scroll. Why don't they look at those? I mean, you've got evidence, and as an investigator, that's what you do. If a child comes up to me when I'm doing an investigation and says, Mr. Fireman, I saw this man, he was running out of the building. He was wearing a red shirt and blue pants. I'm not going to say, go away, little boy. I'm going to say, sit down and talk to me. Because children are the best because they don't make up stuff. They just tell you what they saw. Parents, on the other hand, will say, well, I think what they were doing was. I don't want to hear what they think they were doing. Just tell me the evidence. So that's what I did with the Copper Scroll. I read the first line, understood that it was under ruins, understood that each one of those, there was 57 locations. Each one of those locations had to match within the ruins of Qumran, or I was going to have to go look for another set of ruins. All of them matched at Qumran.
This is amazing. Now, when you say that, I was reading that Shelley wrote a book, and we've done already a program about that. This is a wonderful book, France, if you want to read adventure, investigation, everything, and you have a surprise at the end. And you can find it on Amazon and also on your website, the Copper Scroll Project, and this is wonderful. So I was reading, and it was very touching for me to see, because again, we have to see, as you say, when you investigate things, it's like, it was real people. And when you were saying
yes.
that it's not written only by one person, there was few people, you can see the character. It wasn't done the same way, so you know that there was different people doing it.
Yes.
Can you tell us a bit about that? Because I find that so amazing. Again, it's like reality.
Mm-hmm. Are you talking about the people that wrote the scroll?
Yes.
Yeah. You can look at the scroll, and I wish we had a way to zoom in, but we can't. Zoom in on the scroll. You can see where the handwritings are going along, the same handwriting, and all of a sudden it just switches. Either gets bigger or smaller. And you can see 5 different writers on the copper scroll. Now, why would they use 5 writers? Think about this, and this is my opinion, if they were using, because they had 100 men after the battle that took place, the reason why I believe that they buried all this treasure was because Qumran was the treasury for at least a good portion of the treasury from the temple. Well,
and the temple, and you were saying also the tabernacle, which is, for me, it was very touching to see that, again, like you see the reality of like the temple, which was the first temple. It was treasure of the first temple, wasn't
first
it?
temple, yeah.
And then you say that everything is even from the tabernacle. And for me, it was like, oh my gosh, it's like they go back to Moses. They go back to the reality of how it
The
was
very
over
beginning.
there. Yeah.
Can you imagine those 5 men knowing that they were bearing artifacts from the tabernacle, the temple, from the Beit HaMikdash, the temple? It would just be incredible. But those 5 men buried these items throughout Qumran. And the reason they used 5 different men, and with 100 men, there's another story where they were fighting and only 100 of the priests that were at Qumran lived. So I'm sure they divided those 100 men into 5 teams, which is 20 men per team.
Okay. So were they the Essenes? Is it the priest of the community of Essenes, or this was after?
Yeah, this is the priests of the community at Qumran.
Okay.
They called themselves the Yachad, the United.
Okay.
They called themselves the Way. They called themselves the Sons of Light. They had several different names that you would recognize if I went through all of them, but they were very holy men, very dedicated to God. And I absolutely believe that Qumran is the home of the prophets. I absolutely believe that, and that's where all of our prophets came from. They would come to Jerusalem, they would put their fingers in the face of the high priest or the kings in particular and say, you must stop doing this, and you must do it this way because Torah says do it this way. I absolutely believe that that's where they're from. Over and over again, even for the Christians, John the Baptist
and the way,
Jesus,
there
Yeshua.
There is name written, the way.
Yeah, there's so many indications. There's actually a documentation in there about the birth of John the Baptist and Yeshua. And it gives the exact year of when they were born. It gives the death of Yeshua when he died. It's all written, and it came through. I got it from the Dead Sea Scrolls.
Wow.
It's incredible.
Amazing.
And Qumran is going to be number 2 to only one place, the Temple Mount. If I'm correct, that's going to be a very important place to all of Israel and all the world, in my opinion. It's going to have information about things that we've been longing to know for thousands of years. And if I'm right, and these treasures are still at Qumran, can you imagine what will happen the day we bring the first the first ingots out of the ground. And that's the least important thing, are the ingots.
So I live here,
Yeah.
and I can imagine Qumran is not, it's disputed territories, is it right?
It's in Area C, which is good.
Yeah.
Which is good, because Area B is like co-ownership, and then Area A belongs to, or doesn't belong to them, but they got control. The Palestinians have control of it.
Okay, so this is in C. Okay.
Area C.
Okay.
Which is good.
Okay, so it's okay for that. Now, how does the Jewish people, how do they behave when you speak to them about these things?
Well, at first, they think I'm a nut, just like everybody else did, but that's okay. I mean, how many firemen from Oklahoma figure out the most important scroll of the Dead Sea Scrolls?
This is God likes to use this kind of
crazy
thing.
people.
Like it's not what I mean, but it's like
No, I know.
an unusual path.
Just average guys.
Yeah.
And I'm just an average guy. There's nothing special about me. I have a passion for Bible study.
That's it. But this is very interesting, because when we see the time of the British Mandate, is like it was the same. It was people who love the Bible, who were like digging in it and say, whoa, wait a minute, like Israel, the land of Israel needs to go back to the Jewish people, and it happens. And now, like, you are somebody who loves the Bible, who discover things and the Copper Scroll, and like suddenly you investigate, you find things, and he's like, okay, now he needs to go somewhere. So what is the next step with all the things that we've been finding now, and that you find?
The biggest problem that I have is that there seems to be a block with and the block is coming from the government. I think all of them that I've talked to, that I've presented my research to, they all went, oh my goodness. They even did an excavation based on my research in 2009. They liked it, and they know that there's a very, very good possibility that I'm correct. But the blockage is political, political/religious. Because it's in the West Bank, Judea, Samaria, and the area that it's in is controlled by Israel, but there's always that dispute going on, always that problem. So there's concern, I believe, and I have to respect the Israeli government, of course, because it belongs to Israel. And I'm playing in their backyard, and I have to play by their rules, and I'm very willing to do that, but I'm not willing to just go home and say, okay, I give up. I'm not going to do that. I feel like God has given me something that He wants me to accomplish, and I'm going to very respectfully push forward and try to make this happen, because it's time.
I know. It's interesting that you say that, because again, you came, there was the first time that there was a conference, Jews and Christians, which was very important, I think, because I think some Christians are discovering the temple and the treasure and all of these things are very important. And the Jews are, like, again, we're speaking about this trauma, but they are suddenly saying, oh, we are back in our country, and we have Jerusalem again. And he's like, okay, it's ours. And they almost like to reappropriate all these things that, okay, it's ours. And so it's like a process that's happening. And it was amazing to see this first conference. And now it's like, hey, guys, it's like, I think it's part of the, how do we say, Geula, the redemption that is coming. And it's like a process. And again, I always have this thing that we're speaking about Jacob with Joseph. It's like he had a so traumatic life that step by step he's coming out of the trauma, and redemption is the same. And we read the passage also in Ezekiel 37. You can see there is all the passage of the dry bones. There is nothing, there is no life. And suddenly, is the Ruach who is coming, which is interesting because, again, in the story of Joseph, they say that suddenly is the ruach, is the spirit who speak to him, say, no, look, it's true. And like in this dry bone, it's like there is a process, and then there is sinew coming, and after there is the spirit who's coming to them, and all these bones are moving, and it's like, oh my gosh. And so we need to learn. Thank you again, Jim, for all these things. I want to speak again if you want to know more, because obviously, like we do only a short program. If you want to know more, there is this beautiful book which really speak about all the story of Jim and the Copper Scroll. And Shelley wrote very nicely this book, and it's very exciting to see what's happening in the world, what's happening in Israel, what's happening in Jerusalem, what's happening for the Temple Mount, and all these things. Maybe you can speak to us a bit. I'm blabbering. I wanted you to speak. Tell us what you find, because you discover things, but what are they speaking about? We are very ignorant.
Well, you ask them what is described on the Copper Scroll? Oh, wonderful things. One of the most important things that it talks about on there is, I think, location number 3. It talks about the ephod. You know what the ephod is?
Oh, the ephod.
The breastplate. They actually talk it. It's named on here. I'm sorry?
Of the high priest.
Yes.
What he was.
The breastplate of the high priest, and it's named on there, and it too, location number 3, and the very last location. They're talking about the same spot. It's a cave that I believe we identified it at Qumran for several reasons. I think we've identified it because the first 3 locations on the map on this scroll are in a straight line, with the third one being the spot for the cave, and the last 5 are in a straight line, ascending up the same hill, and the last one is 57, which is the cave. It's like they're pointing at it through history. It's incredible. So the ephod, and the very last one says that all the wealth of the house. What house are they talking about?
Bet HaMikdash.
That's what I believe.
The temple.
Yeah, that's what I did.
Oh my gosh. But we need to know, because a lot of us we don't know. But like the first temple was much more beautiful.
Oh, yeah.
Had much more things inside than the second temple. The people were very happy when they came back from Babylonia, and they were like, "Look, we have a second temple." But the people who knew the first temple, they were lamenting, saying, "But you don't know,
right?
You don't know." And I think, again, when I see all these things, that is like, sometimes when you lost a treasure and it's been for so long, it's like you don't miss it anymore. You see, it was the same for Jacob. He couldn't believe that his son was alive again, because he grieved for him for so long that he's like, don't tell me that he's alive again. You are missing me totally. Yeah. And in one way, it's like, you coming with that and saying, and not only that, you came with that, but you looked and you haven't been able to dig, but you've done an experimentation, and you know that there is gold, that there is silver, that there is treasure. So we know for that. And the archaeologists, they know that you were right. I mean, there was like a...
Yeah, the very man that was in charge of Qumran, Yuval Peleg, wonderful man, he believed that I was correct. I mean, he even said it to Shukadorfan as we were sitting there.
So, but like now it's like, okay, step needs to be done slowly, and not the world can know that, but again, Israel and the Jewish people have to take the treasure in their hands. So, like, take what the investigation and step out.
And here's what the first rabbi that ever showed this to. He was looking at me like, stay back. But then after I showed him the first 3, the fourth one, he got up and he lifted me out of my chair and he kissed me on both cheeks. He said, "Do you know what this means to my people?" I said, "Yes, I know. It means the same thing to my people." Now what I'm telling you is that the trauma you're talking about, I think Israel is going to be, they're traumatized. They've been treated horrible throughout the world. So my goal is to get the Israelis to join with me and work with me to ensure that these things are gotten out of the ground and that they're handled appropriately, that they are not utilized for anything except for what that rabbi told me was, these items are the dowry for the coming bride. And it just made so much sense to me. So it's begun, and now I've got to get Israel behind me. That's my next step. That's why I'm here today, is to start planning that with some people here in Israel to get the Knesset behind us.
This is amazing. So step by step, again, we're speaking about is the redemption. It's part of the redemption. And like they are, again, it's like recovering slowly, and recovering of them, of their trauma, and saying, I can live again. This is amazing. So, friends, you see, this is an amazing book. This is, Jim, thank you for being so humble, first of all.
Well, my pleasure.
For being so persistent, too, because I'm sure that sometimes we say, okay, you know what, it's like, I have a life, but...
No, I never give up. I never felt that. Thank you, though, for thinking of me.
Yeah, and it's beautiful. So you see, it's the Copper Scroll Project. Jim, thank you for speaking to us, because
Certainly.
it's just amazing. Friends, these things need to come into our heart and understand this is the reality of what's happening here. Israel is back in the hand of the Jewish people. This week, even the American President Trump was saying the Golan Heights belongs to the Jewish people and to Israel, to the state of Israel. So there is a lot of things that's happening and still have to happen. I hope that you really enjoy that. Jim, thank you for coming.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. And I hope that you enjoy that, and we'll see you next week. Bye.